So we did keys Tuesday. I did the first pull of Neltharus, and it didn't seem to go very well. It was like pretty messy. People didn't seem to use the chains when they needed to. One guy like literally didn't even use the chains. I've been having a lot of trouble getting the mini boss in, so I've been telling people to like wait until the mini boss is there. People don't do that either. It's bolstering also. So we pull all this stuff. The same stuff on the left side I normally pull all the way over to the right side, get the mini boss, blah, blah, blah. I knew bolstering would be an issue, but it just completely annihilated me. Nothing died, and yeah, it was really not working. So we joked about it on stream. I'm like, oh my God, can you imagine? Did they nerf the chains? And yeah, then like 10 hours later, it's come to fruition that they did. So this is, I have some very heated opinions on this, things that I have a philosophical difference of how games should be designed. Say I grew up in a time in this game where there was things that if you changed them, they would change the competitive fabric of the ladder, as it were, the leaderboards. Okay, especially back in challenge modes, there was a leaderboard, and that was the main reason that people played, like at a competitive in the game level. So you would have like a realm leaderboard or a leaderboard that would be encouraging you to get higher and higher, faster and faster keys or whatever they were at the time. And yeah, it's not necessarily something that I think worked well, but that was a big part of it. And so that was like a permanent leaderboard for the whole season. And they said at the time, like, we can't make changes to these dungeons because if they do, they will invalidate runs that people have already done on the leaderboard. And we do not want those players to feel like they have to come back and relearn or re-progress the dungeon. And somehow that's completely out the window now for Mythic Plus. Like, ever since then, they haven't done that at all. Typically, it's like 90% of the stuff I would say is good changes throughout the season. We did talk a lot about season 2 being a much more iterative season where they're buffing things and getting things more closely together. And one of the best ways they did that was by changing the chains throughout the season. So if you have no idea how this has proliferated, let me start you off with a little funny story here, okay? So when I was doing Mythic Zero, this dungeon, or actually no, it was like normal mode of this dungeon on the alpha or beta, whenever the dungeon was out. I actually made a video on it. I was messing around in there just trying to learn as much as I could about the dungeon. We didn't know that it wasn't going to be present in season 1 at the time. And I saw these chains. So the dungeon was already cleared out. I'm running around and I'm just pulling them from pack to pack, okay? I had no idea what I was doing with them, but I knew that they were doing damage to things. And I was like, oh, this is going to be, everybody's going to need to do this, right? So then, fast forward a whole season, the dungeon's not present. We did it Mythic Zero. I was telling people about it. And then a whole season goes by, a bunch of months go by, and season 2 is now out. So I'm like, okay, well, Neltharus, here we go. Let's learn the dungeon, see Mythic Plus, blah, blah, blah. Nobody's ever grabbing the chains. I'm wondering if they're going to start doing it, when it's going to happen. You never know, but I know it's doing damage to enemies, and it seems really crucial. So I try to pick it up one time, and I use it, and it just kills all the melee. So at the time, it did damage to everything, but it also did damage to everything. So meaning your players around you as well. So if you get that chain up and it snaps, it would basically hit the players that you were close to as well. So as a tank, I effectively could not do this because I would get my damage dealers killed all the time. So that was how it launched this season. Then about probably like 6 weeks into the season, they buffed the hell out of it. They made it, first of all, there was ways that you could like immune the debuff from it as well. So like basically before this, you would have an immunity class, grab it, snap it, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? So that's changed. They don't allow that anymore. But now it just doesn't do damage to players like at all, other than the person who picks it up, I guess. And then I think they even buffed the damage it does, like, because I don't remember it ever being this strong. And then at that point, it was like, oh God, they've over buffed this, right? So that was like a part way through the first like reset of the season, like the first like 10 weeks of the season. and it completely changed the dungeon. The dungeon went from probably the hardest dungeon to, I would say, like one of the top 3 easiest dungeons week after week. The timer is significantly looser, and it's to a point now where I'm getting like easy. I'm recognizing this dungeon as a pushable target, and I'm having a good expectation for it for every dungeon. Perfect. That's what you want, right? Whether it's overpowered or not. I like that. I don't know if other people like items in dungeons. I would say typically I don't. Like for example, in the Iron Stars in Iron Docks, I didn't like, but that was because of how people were trying to metagame it, right? And it wasn't very fun. It's a tank. It's a tank. I would just sit there and watch hunters fail it all. There's so many. There's like clips of this on the channel. If you guys didn't see Iron Docks season 4 Shadowlands, go back and look at the clips from back then. There's so many funny moments where like people try to get all the ads and then they just die or something like that. But or miss with the stars. So those kind of things are really frustrating in a pug because that's the run. Some mage throws the iron star the wrong direction. The run's over now, you know? This is the perfect one. There's no real like requirement to do it. I've upgraded this key without even, like you can obviously still upgrade the key without them, but you don't have to maximize them. It's not like it is in Iron Docks where like it's gonna kill like a huge swath of the hardest trash. This is all pretty easy trash. The only thing this is doing is just getting the timer to be shorter. You're basically deleting this trash from the dungeon and still getting count from it. So I like this a lot. It's certainly better than situations in the past. It's less fiddly, and I have more agency over it because it rewards like successful play as the tank. So then you got I don't know. So this is a comment that somebody made here. This dude's like a warrior, and he's I don't know what the point of even making this post is, honestly. But yeah, so apparently I don't like whatever. I'm not gonna debate the validity of this, but apparently they're doing keys where 42% of the overall damage in Neltharus is the key, and they just changed this on details, and it makes me wonder if that's a coincidence or not. But yeah, like somehow this person's saying that the junkyard robots. Okay, yeah. So that it even says there this doesn't count the junkyard haste bot or the damage amp from spear and necrotic wake, and haste bot stacked like multiplicatively with the zap bot. So if you ever did junkyard on a high key, like especially back in BFA, you would know that like when they had corruption, you would know that it would almost always be your top damage in the entire key. So I really, really, really doubt the junk bots, the bots in general did less than any of these other things, especially Siege of Brow. I mean, Siege of Browse, that was like super niche. Necrotic Wake also, I really, yeah, I really don't. Anyway, I don't know about these numbers, but somehow he's saying that 50% of the damage done in the key was done with chains. And the only way that that could be true is if you're constantly snapping in enemies, bringing enemies in that shouldn't be killed. Because if you look at the actual route, you only kill about probably like 40% of the count with the chains previously. That's not, 42% of the overall damage, right? But it could be. So I guess a lot of people are heavily invested in this strategy, and it's no surprise that Blizzard acts. But this is how they act, and at first I was not. Let's just read what it says here. So chains, nerfs, and Neltharus. The burning chain nerf has had a rather large impact. A lot of enemies can no longer be hit at all. This separates mobs into 3 different categories. Mobs that can trigger and be hit by chains, mobs that cannot trigger the chains but can be hit by the explosion effect, and mobs that cannot be hit at all. So, yes, this is now really crucial to what I've been doing and probably what a lot of people have been doing. So these mobs can trigger the chains and can be hit by the detonation. So this is pretty much every mob on the right side, including the mini boss, which is really good to see that. I was worried that the mini boss was going to be moved out. And then these ones can only be hit by the chain. So the phoenixes, those are the small ones. Now that's important because a lot of people were pulling those phoenixes and using them to chain off onto other trash that's not on this list. Okay. But there's no need to do that because there is other trash in that room that you can just pull instead. But that is something that people were doing. And then the Kalashi Warden, that's the major, like the first guy you see in the dungeon, the big guy. So that's generous of Blizzard to allow that guy, those two. I don't think there's a Warden anywhere else in that area, right? Like this is exclusively mob that is not in the area, still being able to be hit by chains. So that's generous. But I guess maybe people were exploiting that guy to get more mobs. I don't really know. But anyway, all of these mobs can no longer interact with chains now. So this is, I mean, I don't see anything on this list that I don't recognize. I'm pretty sure this is just everything else in the dungeon, right? Like, I don't know. There's probably a few mobs that aren't on the list. But yeah, this is pretty much just like everything else in the dungeon. But yeah, so previously those things worked, but they wouldn't trigger the chain. So if you ever watch me do this, I would do this complicated strategy at the end of the dungeon where we would get the 3 mobs in the middle, that ramp leading up to the final boss. We would grab those over with other mobs from inside that right side and then pull them all together and use the chains to kill them. That is no longer going to be possible. These mobs will take 0 damage from the chains, okay? And that includes the packs on the left side entirely. So we were doing that at the poll as well. That's not really a big deal because one way or the other, you can just fight that stuff. But yeah, so impact on the season. This change will definitely slow down groups as many would pull at least one pack from the magma dust trash to the burning chains. And the reason you want to do this is simply because it's really efficient to get all these mobs killed, but also just to get the chain on cooldown. Because if you just went to the right side the whole way, you're only going to be able to use chains on some of the trash instead of all of the trash. Doing it this way makes it so you can literally kill every mob on the right side with the chains, provided you can survive as the tank and maybe potentially survive after all the mobs die. Like sometimes they're spiteful, sometimes they're sanguine. That will cause issues, but maybe bolstering too. So anyway, what do you think of this change? Says this Wowhead poster. At first glance, I was very, very, very upset about this. And like I said earlier, this is upsetting the competitive balance of the beginning of the season and the end of the season. But this isn't new. Even though I dislike it, it's pretty normal for Blizzard. And frankly, I have to say, I have to blame a lot of the MDI stuff for this. I think if people I don't know where you get this number from and what people were doing, but I know for a fact that you were able to snap a lot of the mobs in the dungeon, especially in the upper levels of the right side, down into the lower levels. And if you could do that, period, people are going to do it. So not necessarily blaming them because obviously everybody wants as much of a competitive advantage as they can get. But those are the kind of things that just, yeah, it ruins it for the rest of us. And now we all get nerfed because of it. But again, it's not, you can't stop people from doing that kind of stuff. I've been saying that for years. Mythic Plus has different rules than raids. But unfortunate. So that was my original thought was like, I hate this. I really dislike it. Then I did the key. I don't know if you saw the stream from Wednesday, but I did the key and we had no idea what we were doing route wise. I had no plan to change anything, like how we were going to play it. I literally just did the exact same pull at the start minus the farthest left pack that I would get, because those mobs won't be hit by the chains at all now, and they would just bolster like crazy. And then I just pulled those with that patrol that's been giving us issues anyway this week. So those two, and then the next two together, and then we're on to the boss, right? And that actually, it didn't seem that much slower. Obviously, it was slower, but it wasn't really that big of a deal. And then at the end, I said, okay, well, instead we will snap the 2 fellas above down again. I was trying to do that, but they were evading. So I couldn't gather the 3, it would be that pack, and then the pack inside, and then the pack in the middle, and I couldn't get them all together without those mobs killing people while they evade. So I stopped doing that, and I was like, I'll just do that again now, and we can just AoE everything down. Well, guess what? They don't snap anymore. So on top of this, they seemingly made it so the mobs will not leave their, placed area. I don't necessarily know if that's true or what. I've got one sample size, but that's what happened to me, and it pretty much almost lost us the key. So if you watch that key, it's funny because I really have no business upgrading that key. I had absolutely no plan for the dungeons route and actually messed it up massively to the point where we didn't have enough count at the end of the boss, to get to the boss. and we had to pull like stuff that I did like completely unaware even like really existed. And we upgrade the key. A 24. I think that was that was my first 24 as well. On either difficulty. So my first impressions of this, it doesn't matter. It actually just doesn't really it really doesn't change much, to be honest. There's one or two pulls that are one or two packs out of all the pulls that are gonna be not killed by the chains now. The way I was doing it, and the timer's still really loose. Now the group we did it with was very very good, no doubt. But I was really shocked. I'm like, I thought that would have had a bigger impact on it, and especially with bolstering. So I don't know. You guys tell me what you think of this. I like philosophically take a stand against this kind of thing. I really don't like this. Big changes to a dungeon, especially in a negative way that will impact the progression that was made earlier in the season. Like, we were talking about it on stream, and I was like, well, we're now we're gonna have to learn a whole new route. And honestly, like at first glance, I'm like, I'm not gonna do that. Like, I'm just not gonna spend a bunch of time learning a whole new pattern in here 12 weeks into the season. I just have checked out on that. You know what I mean? Like the time for learning the routes has kind of passed, and I struggle with that. It's not a good habit to have as a tank, but that's just how I am. So I just did the same thing, and we messed around and didn't do it well, but we still upgrade the key. So let me know what you guys think about all this, especially other tanks, and if you think that these types of changes are good for the game. Do you blame the Great Push? Like, what are your thoughts on all this? But it ends up not being a big deal. Like, I'm surprised, actually. So yeah, that's probably the last time I'll do that key on Fortified this season. But you know what? That wasn't really that bad at all. But I think, like, community perception and things like the Great Push, it does influence the game more than it should, and that's disappointing to me. But that's 2023. I guess everything's a little different now.